أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
We seek refuge in Allah from the accursed shaitan.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون.
O you, the ones who believe, fasting has been prescribed upon you, just as it was prescribed to the ones before you, so that maybe you can become God conscious.
أياما معدودات.
A number of counted days.
فمن كان منكم مريضا.
So whomsoever from you is ill
أو على سفر.
or upon a journey,
فعدة من أيام أخر.
they can make up the days at a later date.
وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مسكين.
And whoever has the capacity can feed the needy, the miskin.
فمن تطوع خيرا فهو خير له.
And whomsoever voluntarily wishes to give more, then it is better for him.
وأن تصوموا خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون.
But that you fast is better for you, if only you were aware.
شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن.
The month of Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was sent down.
هدى للناس.
A guidance for the whole of mankind.
وبينات من الهدى والفرقان.
And clear proofs from the guidance and the criterion.
فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصمه.
So whomsoever from you witnesses the month, let him fast.
ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر.
Whomsoever from you is ill or on a journey, they can make up the fast at a later date.
يريد الله بكم اليسر.
Allah desires ease upon you all.
ولا يريد بكم العسر.
He does not desire hardship.
ولتكملوا العدة.
And He desires that the days are completed.
ولتكبروا الله.
And that you do takbir, glorification of Allah.
ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون.
That you glorify Allah due to His guiding you, so that maybe you may become appreciative.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهداه أما بعد. May Allah Ta'ala accept from all of you your fasting and your worship and all your efforts. Jazakumullah khairan to the Islamic Society for arranging this iftar. And I hope that some benefit comes from these regular short speeches that you have during the month of Ramadan, inshallah. As well as that, I ask Allah Ta'ala to grant you all success with your studies and your exams that I know many of you have upcoming, or most of you even. Inshallah, for the next few minutes, the intention is to briefly divert your attention to the mindset that we should be in when it comes to approaching Ramadan. Allah Ta'ala, when He spoke about fasting, not many verses in the Quran speak about fasting. Only a few verses speak about fasting as an act of worship and how it's to be performed and things like that. And that's only in one surah. The Quran is the surah that we've just heard being recited, and that's Surah Al-Baqarah. And 5 verses discuss fasting. 5 verses. Of which 3 were recited. And Allah Ta'ala brings or begins discussion on these verses by talking about the objective of fasting, and then ends the verses by reminding us of the objective of fasting once again. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم. O you who believe, fasting has been legislated upon you or prescribed upon you, as it has been upon those before you. Those before you fasted as well. The Jews, the Christians, the concept of fasting is still alive with them today. So that you may obtain taqwa, so that you may obtain an awareness of God, a consciousness of God. Then at the end of the 5 verses, Allah Ta'ala says, كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ آيَاتِ كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. And thus Allah shows His signs to the people so that they may obtain God consciousness. Once again. The start was taqwa and the end was taqwa. And that's the objective of worship, generally speaking. And this is important because when we become attached to the physical act of worship themselves without looking beyond that, that means our acts of worship that we're regularly doing, fasting, praying, giving to charity, whatever it is that we're doing, even this type of thing, arranging events and lectures and conferences and so on, it becomes simply a customary thing. It becomes a habit type of thing. We're ISOC, so therefore we're supposed to do lectures. That's just how it's supposed to be. We're Muslim, therefore we're supposed to fast. That's how it's supposed to be. And then we move away from the meaning of worship to simply the apparent appearance of worship, which is a big problem. And that's a mistake in understanding worship. And that's why when Allah Ta'ala commands us to worship Him, once again He commands us to worship for the sake of a greater purpose, which is to instill within us taqwa. يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اعْبُدُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. O people, worship your Lord, the one who created you and those who came before you, so that you may obtain taqwa. Once again, taqwa. And when we appreciate this, regardless of a person's circumstances during the month of Ramadan, they never miss out on Ramadan. When we make Ramadan all about leaving food and drink, that means a huge number of the Muslim population is missing out on Ramadan. Because a lot of people are not fasting, for whatever reason. It could be illness, it could be giving birth, it could be pregnancy, it could be menstruation, whatever. Either the whole month or part of the month, a lot of people are not going to be fasting. Meaning a lot of people are not going to be abstaining from food and drink, for whatever reason. If the sole objective of Ramadan is to keep away from food and drink, there goes a big chunk of the Muslim community who cannot benefit from Ramadan in any way, shape or form. And that's why Allah Ta'ala, when He obliged fasting upon us, immediately He linked it to instilling within ourselves a God consciousness. What does that mean, this taqwa that we're constantly hearing and that's constantly repeated on the minbar every Friday and sometimes at the beginning of lectures? It means that we are living our lives, generally speaking, we're living our lives with an awareness of Allah. We're living our lives upon guidance. We're living our lives with a consciousness. We're awake, we're alive. We're not asleep, we're not heedless, we're not all over the place and just doing whatever happens. There's an awareness, there's a consciousness. We're living our lives in a particular way. That doesn't mean that we have to change our lives to become abnormal. We're living our lives just like anyone else would live their lives. The only difference is that we're living it with a consciousness in the back of our minds. The objective of fasting is to instill within us and to inculcate within us a sense of discipline, a sense of control, a sense of taqwa, as we said. So that when we spend the whole month keeping away from things that are halal, like food and drink and sexual relations, and all 3 of these things are halal. They're permissible throughout the year. and they're even permissible during Ramadan, during the night. So when we're keeping away from things that are halal for a specified period of time with a specific intention, regardless of the community around us, regardless of whether the person next to us is eating, drinking or not, we stick to that command from Allah Ta'ala. So when we've kept away from halal, we should be even more prepared to then keep away from things that are haram throughout the year. So when we're instilling into ourselves a discipline and a self-control that keeps us away from things that are halal and things that are part of our human nature, things that we can't do without, things that we can't do without, then we should be even more capable of keeping away from things that are harmful to our nature. There might be natural inclinations towards those sins, but they're still harmful to our nature because they're a transgression when it comes to human nature. It's in human nature to eat and drink, but certain foods and certain drinks and a certain amount of food and drink is a transgression in that human nature. So then it becomes harmful. It's in our nature to desire the opposite gender and sexual relations, etc., and that's fine. But once that goes beyond a specific boundary, it becomes a transgression, and therefore it goes from being beneficial and within our nature to being harmful. So ultimately, when we are obeying Allah Ta'ala, we're the ones who benefit, not Allah. Because whether we obey or disobey, Allah doesn't benefit, or it doesn't strengthen Allah in any way. And that takes me to another point, and that is that not everyone will have the same Ramadan. Some people will have different commitments and different things going on during the month of Ramadan. I imagine many of you have got exams. Who's got exams during the month of Ramadan? Yes, there's quite a few of you. So I imagine that a large portion of your time is going to be occupied with revision and things like that. But does that mean that a person loses out during the month of Ramadan in comparison to someone who spends his whole day in the masjid? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. If we make the objective and we remind ourselves that the objective of this month of Ramadan is discipline and awareness of God and obedience of God, we can do that when we're sitting down revising for our exams. When we come into university, there are a lot of opportunities for us to be mindful of God. Being fair when taking an exam and not cheating. Keeping our eyes down when instead of looking at something that we shouldn't be looking at. Keeping our mouths closed instead of saying things that we shouldn't be saying. Do you have to be in the masjid to do these things? No. Do you have to pick up a mushaf to do these things? No. These are things that are constantly there. So when I am consciously revising, when I am carrying myself about on campus in a proper way, then I am working towards the objective of taqwa, just like the person who's keeping away from food and drink is working towards the objective of taqwa. No difference between us. And who said studying isn't an act of worship? And who said working isn't an act of worship? And this is why the Prophet ﷺ says, مَنْ لَمْ يَدَعْ قَوْلَ الزُّورِ وَالْعَمَلَ بِهِ فَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ حَاجَةٌ فِي أَنْ يَدَعَ طَعَامَهُ وَشَرَابَهُ. Whoever doesn't leave evil speech and acting upon it, then Allah doesn't need you to leave your food and drink. Allah doesn't need you to leave your food and drink. Now, bearing this hadith in mind, which is the greater objective? Obedience to Allah or keeping away from food and drink? Not a rhetorical question. Question to you. Bearing this hadith in mind, what's the greater purpose of Ramadan? To be mindful of Allah and obedient to Allah, or to keep away from food and drink? To be mindful of Allah. Mindful of Allah. Because a person could be keeping away from food and drink and relations during the whole month of Ramadan, but they get very little out of the month of Ramadan. And somebody could be eating and drinking and having relations during the whole month of Ramadan for a valid excuse. Obviously, if it was due to an invalid excuse, then that would be a deficiency in taqwa in the first place. So there's a problem. But for a valid excuse, they are eating, they're drinking, and they're not abstaining from these invalidators of fasting during the whole month of Ramadan. But they're trying to be mindful of Allah as much as possible in their day-to-day life. Who's going to gain more from Ramadan? The first or the second? The second without hesitation. The second person will gain a lot more without hesitation. Uh, Perhaps a final point, or a penultimate point. Another thing is, when the Prophet ﷺ speaks about worship, he spoke about it in it being something that brings us closer to Allah, and thus Allah's guidance is with us throughout our lives. That's why the Prophet ﷺ says, يَقُولُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى, Allah Ta'ala says, and it's a long hadith. Part of it is, the most beloved of things that my servant can do to come closer to me is those things that are obligatory. وَلَا يَزَالُ عَبْدِي يَتَقَرَّبُ إِلَيَّ بِالنَّوَافِلِ, and my servant continues to come closer and closer to me until he becomes beloved to me, till that servant becomes beloved to Allah. And when they become beloved to me, I become his eyes that he sees with, I become their hearing that they hear with, I become their hand that they hold with, and their feet that they walk with. And if they ask, I will give them. And if they seek refuge, I should grant them. What does that mean? Allah Ta'ala becoming our hand, and becoming our feet, and becoming our eyes and our ears. What does that mean? That means that every move in our lives is guided by Allah. Allah's help is with us throughout our lives. So when we see with Allah's guidance. When we speak with Allah's guidance. When we have a decision to make, we make it with Allah's help. That's the purpose of worship. That constant coming closer to God, and instilling with us a sense of taqwa, which in turn brings us closer and closer to Allah. And therefore, it's a mistake to view acts of worship as things that we only do for the sake of numerical rewards. Yeah, numerical rewards. And I maybe spoke about this previously, but I mention it again. It's a bad mistake. It's a bad mistake in our community that we deal with good deeds mathematically. Yeah? It's a bad mistake. Meaning that we say, if you do this good deed, you're going to get 10 rewards. And if you get 10 rewards, it's going to be multiplied by 100. And that's going to be multiplied by 700. And that's going to be multiplied by 83. And that's going to be multiplied by 500. Because every page in the Quran has 500 letters. And when you do this, it's going to be multiplied by that. And in the end, you could earn up to 350 million something rewards. Do we know what a reward is in the first place? Rewards are from the matters of the unseen in the first place. Secondly, what proves that this approach is incorrect, even though it's a widespread thing? And maybe at the beginning of Ramadan, we get messages saying, read one page and you get this, and in 5 minutes you can get this many rewards. What proves that that's a mistaken approach? The proof is that Allah rewards according to intention. That means that I could read a page of the Quran, and you could read a page of the Quran, and the difference in reward is the difference between the heavens and the earth. You could have gained an enormous closeness to Allah through your sincere recitation of the Quran, and I maybe got further and further away from Allah with my recitation of the Quran, either because I recited it in a pride way, an arrogant way, or for purposes that are not noble. So when we know that sincerity is what matters, does it make sense to count rewards numerically? No. We're the ones who count, because we're human beings. That's how we deal with things. Yeah? Give you this, I want a $5 back. Give you a $5 to borrow, I want a $5 back. Give you this, give me a $10. We deal with numbers so stringently. Allah doesn't deal with it like that. Allah doesn't deal like that. Allah Ta'ala rewards us without accountability. We needn't worry about counting. That's something that comes. When our objective is closeness to Allah, and when our objective is worship, then all these things follow and come. Okay. And I'll end inshallah before we open things up for people to a specific timing or what? Minute or two? Yeah. Before we open up the floor, if someone has any comments. I strongly recommend that this Ramadan we try to put an effort into understanding some of the meanings of what we recite from the Quran, so that our recitation of the Quran doesn't become restricted to purely reciting, purely reading for the sake of blessing, which is a great thing and is beneficial. And this is the month of the Quran, that's fine. But we will only feel that there is a a real relationship between us and the Quran if we start to think about some of its meanings, by resorting to a translation, by resorting to a book of tafsir, by resorting to classes or lectures or audios or whatever that talk about the meanings of the Quran, whatever. The point is, when we start to read the Quran in that manner, we start to realize, hold on, all of this is mentioned in the Quran. All these questions I had are answered in the Quran. All these things that I thought I have to go to some super expert in Islamic sciences to it's in the Quran. And we link so many verses of the Quran to scenarios that we ourselves have faced, challenges that we've faced, questions that we've had, answers that we're looking for. They're in the Quran. They're in the Quran. The Quran, when Allah makes the Quran a book of guidance, how can it be a book of guidance if we just recite it? And there's a huge difference between reciting and between contemplating and between studying. And the Prophet ﷺ would study the Quran with Jibreel every year in Ramadan. Yeah? He wouldn't just recite. It was a proper study of the Quran. Not necessarily the way we're imagining study, a tafsir lesson, no. But the point is that recitation that occurred between the Prophet ﷺ and Jibreel was one of awareness, was one of contemplation, was one of thinking, was one of meaning. Not just reciting as we do habitually. And so if we can take out a few, a small portion of the day and try to, just spend some time looking at a page of the Quran, recite it in Arabic, and also look at its meaning in English, and try to look over it over and over again and try to extract benefits and meanings and lessons. You'll come away with huge benefits, inshallah. And you'll find that the Quran is much more powerful and impactful than we would otherwise have recited it. I'll leave it to that. May Allah give you and give us all success in the dunya and akhirah. Make Ramadan a month that we are happy with at the end of the month, and a month that has a positive impact on us. Yep. What little acts can we do in our day to increase our good deeds, and which ones are most beneficial? And what I've just mentioned relating to the Quran. And by the way, people are different when it comes to acts of worship. People find more ease doing different acts of worship. Yeah? Some people struggle to read much of the Quran, but they're comfortable sitting there saying Subhanallah wa bihamdih, Subhanallah al-Azim 1,000 times. Like, no problem. So long as we are always worshipping and doing acts of worship with an awareness, like we said. Yeah, with a consciousness. We're awake when doing it. That's fine. And that's why when somebody came to Imam Ahmad and asked him, what's the best act of worship that I can do? He said, the best act of worship you can do is the best act for your heart. For your heart. So that might differ from person to person. Sometimes you feel motivated to read some Quran, sometimes you feel motivated to do something else. Not a problem. But there's no hesitation that one of the best things that we can do is what I've just mentioned about reciting the Quran in a proper way. Reciting the Quran and then looking at its meanings. It really is something that has an impact. It has an impact on us spiritually. It's not just an academic practice. Okay, we're sitting there and trying to extract rulings, and it might seem like it. It's very, very effective in purifying our hearts, very effective for our spirituality. Because now we're worshipping Allah through reading the Quran with meaning. And that's what's effective. It's not about numbers. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, سَبَقَ دِرْهَمْ مِئَةَ أَلْفَ دِرْهَمْ. 1 dirham, 1 pound, a quid, has beaten 100,000 dirhams. And then the Prophet ﷺ went on to explain that the one who donated 1 dirham did so because that was the best that he can do. And the one who gave 100,000 dirhams did so whilst being exceptionally wealthy. And so this was a small effort on his behalf. So that shows that reward and the quality of reward is based on sincerity, intention, and based on the effort that we put in, as well as based on the quality of our actions. So let's think of worship like that. It doesn't have to be much. It doesn't need to be much. It can be a small portion of the day. The point is quality. That's one thing that we can do. What are some of the ways I can make the most of Ramadan whilst revising, etc. exams. Not too different to what I've mentioned. One thing is having a proper intention whilst revising for exams. That's important. And when we are, let's hold this. When we are working, earning money, when we're studying, when we are going through the stages of reaching a certain objective, so that we can make some sort of positive change or have a positive impact on society or those around us, are these things that are non-religious? Are these things non-religious? And this is why one of the problems that we have is to consider Islamic studies. We say Islamic studies and then dunya studies. This is religious and this is dunya. So you guys all indulge in dunya. Every day you're on campus purely dunya. Okay, yes, we are living in the dunya. So everything we do is part of the dunya. But the point is, if an action is a good action, it's a noble action, that's beloved to Allah. What's special about an act of worship? An act of worship is something that is beloved to Allah, brings us closer to Allah. So when I do a dunya type thing, with the objective of doing something, or obtaining something, or achieving something that's beloved to Allah, doesn't that gain the same status as an act of worship? In fact, some things that are considered dunya things are more important than an individual act of worship. And that's why the scholars, rahimahumullah ta'ala, say that it's a communal obligation. For example, to have doctors in the community, or to have accountants, or to have solicitors, or to have whatever type of job that people need. It's a communal obligation. What does that mean? Fard kifaya. That means it's obligatory. It's a religious obligation. When they say fard kifaya, they mean it's a religious obligation. So when you're studying in order to do something which long term is beneficial to the wider society, you're fulfilling a religious obligation. Whereas sitting down in the masjid and remembering Allah, etc., as noble as that is, it's not an obligation. It's not an obligation. And it's a restricted act of worship, meaning you're the one who benefits from it alone. No, it doesn't go beyond you. So keep that in mind. When revising, it's essential to keep in mind that we want to have positive intentions in whatever we do. Secondly, as I said, reminding ourselves that Ramadan is there for the sake of God consciousness, for the sake of awareness. And that can be done regardless of what we're doing. It can be done regardless of what we're doing. And as I said, acts of worship are flexible. Acts of worship are flexible. The main thing is something consistent, something quality. But one thing that I'd like all of us to do is to have a portion of reciting the Quran and pondering over it. That's inshallah common ground. Is it permissible to skip fasting to make it up later if you have important exams? Allah Ta'ala has given a concession for missing fasts for those who either are traveling or those who are ill and struggle to fast. And I strongly believe that during the day of Ramadan, sometimes we convince ourselves that we're weak and we're tired and we're about to collapse. And we just yesterday at the masjid, before Taraweeh even started, huge bottles of water being, a whole army was coming in with bottles of water, throwing them around the masjid. Going, brother, we haven't even started Salah. It's like people have come into the masjid straight away. They are, but this is so hard. We're going to stand for a whole hour, and obviously we're going to feel weaker and less capable if we're forcing ourselves to believe that. And I'm certain that during the month of Ramadan it's the same. During the day of Ramadan, the more we expect to be tired, the more we expect to be shattered, the more we expect to not be able to do different things because we're fasting, because it's Ramadan, we won't be able to do them, and we'll find it difficult. If we put that to the side and just get on with our lives as we should be getting on with them, we won't feel the impact. People play sports during Ramadan. I remember when I played football, before I put on this much weight, consistently played football. Ramadan was my top performance typically. Ramadan did not have an impact at all on my performance. Because I didn't care, I want to play football. That was my greatest concern. So long as I'm playing, so long as I'm doing well, so long as our team's winning, I'm happy. And Ramadan didn't even cross my mind. So that's the first thing. That we shouldn't allow Ramadan or we shouldn't convince ourselves that we are incapable of doing things just because we're fasting. We're fine. We really are fine. Alhamdulillah. But some people maybe aren't fine. And that goes back to the individual. Yeah. As a general rule, we say people are fine. Fasting we can do without much of a problem. And we should convince ourselves that we're fine. For some people, they may have a difficulty or a struggle when it comes to fasting. And if you find that fasting either gives you a headache or just doesn't allow you to concentrate at all, etc., and you've got, as you said, important exams that you can't miss, then look at your situation, look at your condition. Okay, if you feel that genuinely there's going to be a massive impact on your performance because psychologically and physically you're not so strong, then in that case, and you have, inshallah, a concession. And the European Council for Fettah and Research has given a ruling to this effect, that those who find themselves in that state do have a concession for breaking their fast. But I repeat once again, this is an individual concession. It's not a general thing. If you've got exams, you can break your fast. Because Allah Ta'ala has only allowed breaking the fast for certain excuses. Yeah? And the thing or the wisdom that combines these excuses is a hardship. And so if there's a genuine hardship and there's a struggle in keeping one's fast whilst performing, and you fear that it's going to impact your exams severely, then, and inshallah, there's a concession. You break your fast and make it up after Ramadan. But only if there's a genuine need. And try to, as I said, psychologically, just get on with things. And I'm sure, inshallah, things will be fine. Particularly, bearing in mind that most exams are in the morning. And if they are in the afternoons, well, what's the latest exam that anyone has come across being done?
9 p.m.
Allahu Akbar, 9 p.m? MashaAllah. What subject do you study?
Physics.
May Allah give you success. At 9 p.m. Alhamdulillah, it's Maghrib by then. No excuse, still no excuse. Yeah, so, no, that's fine. As I said, it goes back to the person. It goes back to the individual. As a general rule, we should be fine, inshallah. Fasting doesn't have that much of an impact. I'm sure most of us have done it before. But as an individual, you might genuinely have an issue fasting. You might genuinely find a big difficulty. Maybe because fasting is not something you've done so much. Maybe because physically you just struggle when you're not taking in fluids or whatever. It goes back to you as an individual. And then, if you do decide to break your fast, you make it up after Ramadan.
Brother, presumably you mentioned the European Council of Fettah. This is a reliable body, isn't it?
It is a reliable body. Yeah. And some of those who are in the council are my closest teachers, so I've got no choice but to say they're reliable. In fact, the president is one of my closest teachers. The president of the Fiqh Council, which talks about the various rulings that relate to Muslims in Europe. So they've tried to discuss various problems that Muslims in Europe face. They've discussed student loans, they've discussed fasting during Ramadan, they've discussed mortgages, they've discussed various things that people face on a day-to-day basis. Go back to their rulings on their app, the European Council for Fettah and Research. As I said, it's in English and as well as in Arabic.
It's 625.
Sorry?
Fatwa 625.
Fatwa 625.
No, 6.
Okay. Yeah, Jazakallah. Yeah. Leeds Grand Mosque have it on their website. That's fine, yeah. What are some practical ways differentiating our intentions from pure, those which are made dunya based during Ramadan? I think, I hope that this point is, and I'm sure it is, relevant to the question. One of the best ways to strengthen our sincerity is to do private acts of worship without people knowing. And one of our shuyukh, when he was discussing had a bit of a meeting or a conference with students of knowledge and imams and people who give khutbah and things like that. And one thing that he mentioned is, to everyone, he said, all these things that you do in public, don't rely on that. So you're giving lectures, you're writing articles, you're writing books, you're doing this, don't rely on that. Why? Because it's public. And because it's a public thing, there's always an element of, wanting some sort of, as you said in the question, dunya type thing. Okay, either some praise, people to like you, people to laugh at what you're saying, people, not at what you're saying, at your jokes perhaps, people to sort of think highly of you, etc. That is always there when you do things in public. Or at least there's a risk. I'm not saying it's impossible to do things properly in public, but there's always that risk. So the best way to work on our sincerity is to do things that are private, that nobody knows about. It could be any act of worship, literally any act of worship, it doesn't matter. It could be saying astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh 100 times, privately, nobody knows about that, but you say to yourself, I can't do much, but this is one thing I can do. If you do that thing sincerely, without anyone knowing, number one, you'll find that to be heavy on the Day of Judgment, because it's sincere. Number two, it will actually improve the things that we do in public. So when we come to doing things in public, because we've worked on our sincerity and worked on these hearts so much already by doing private acts of worship, even when it comes to doing things in public, we find that there's a sincerity there. There's a better sincerity. So it's not. We don't need to worry too much about am I doing this sincerely, not sincerely, etc. It's fine. If the intention is positive, it's a good intention. It's not there for it's not a cheap type of intention of just wanting claps or wanting praise and things like that. Then that's a good start. And we just keep sort of moving. But on the side, we need that private act of worship to continue building us. And hopefully, like that, our sincerity develops bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And we'll find that across with our actions. Any other comments or points? Brothers and sisters, you're more than welcome to verbally make them, even if you haven't written them down. Taib. Have you got something there? No. Taib. Brothers, anything? Jazakumullah khairan. And I wish you all the best. And hope to see you soon. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you for everyone.